on different sections, and then we exchange this section with a lot of comments on the side. Like each word has about 10 comments to explain to the other guy what you did, and which aspects you did. So then we revise each other, and then like every month or two we meet for a long lunch and a bottle of wine, and we get drunk and we agree on it.
Because I would have thought possibly brainstorming is the way. And feeling as way should be read aloud.
It should be read aloud.
And from the loud reading
group,
things start going, and it would take forever to do a translation like that.
Yeah.
But maybe in your lunches with lots of wine.
Yeah, no, they have. And it's really, some things you understand only when you're not thinking about them.
Yes, absolutely.
It happens almost every day. There's something that we cannot understand. We call somebody, we call the Dutch translators, we call for other people. Nobody has a final word on some parts of it. So you have to interpret. But when you understand, that's where the problem starts, because then you have to create it,
And you have to go back and rethink.
Yeah, it's the opposite of normal books. Like in a normal book, when you understand, you're happy. You understand, say, fuck no.
You have to re-elaborate. But as any translation of those things come to you in the middle of the night, when you're not thinking about it, but your mind is something completely different, it clicks. And you have to get up and write it down, otherwise you forget it. Or try not to. And let's move from Joyce to Don O'Ryan.
Here we go.
Equally cryptic. Or not like Finnegan's Wake, but
not so much. I'm not going to die.
Please hear that. But I read The Spinning Heart now, preparing to meet you and to talk about it. I found it an extraordinary book. Totally condensed. No character has more than 3 or 4 pages. Initially, totally confusing. You don't know the way it's going to go. Turn the page, someone else. Is this going to go on like this? Is it going to change? It distilled of obviously something much bigger originally. For the translator, that is to pose questions before you find the voice of all those characters. Tell us a bit about it. How do you go about it?
There is perhaps a distinction that I would like to make from the very beginning. Once that you have to translate Don O'Ryan or Catherine Dunne, and you have to translate into Italian, therefore you're thinking about Italian readership. You have to be aware of the fact that you are translating an Irish author. This seems banal, but it is not.
And it's a sine qua non.
Yes, absolutely so for a translator. But for instance, till 10, 20 years ago, James Joyce in Italy was not felt to be an Irish writer. He was felt to be a British one. And the Irishness in his books, which is so clear and so plain to anybody of you, was absolutely not perceived by the scholars, by the academics.
Wouldn't the setting be enough?
No, absolutely not.
It's so obvious.
It's so crazy, but really, I did my PhD in the early 2000s, and one night I was at this dinner, and a PhD, the supervisor of the PhD school, as we call it in Italy, was there, and I heard that you are working on the contemporary authors of Ireland, and that you're insisting on James Joyce being the granddad of all those authors, and I would say, yes, indeed, I am. And how come? I mean, it's so strange. James Joyce has always been a British author to me.
And this is the big man.
Yes, indeed. No, woman, actually. Woman, yeah.
Oh.
The woman is dead now. It comes to my mind, actually. Anyhow, and I said, no, absolutely not. This author is definitely Irish. It couldn't be more Irish. Of course, she wasn't in the position to accept what I was saying.
But they never read the portrait. They never read.
Of course they did. They did in a way which I really cannot agree with, but they did. So by now things have changed a lot, definitely. So in the wake of several works, also as as far as criticism is concerned, you know, when Kuyper's books have been read, and therefore you and many others, including Wright, are perceived to be genuinely Irish authors, at least not English. Absolutely not English. Donald Ryan is one of the keystones in that book is the language, and everybody is arguing for that. At the same time, you have a book with 21 monologues, and therefore you have not just one style, you have 21 different styles. And so when I happened to see him, I told him, were you thinking about your translator when you were writing that book? It's so difficult, you know, to reproduce 21 styles. Each voice has a different style in that book, and therefore I didn't have anyone like Fabio Pedone when I was working, but luckily enough I had a wonderful editor, Mirko Zilahi, working with me, and he helped me a lot. Also because we are from two different parts of, two different regions of Italy. And therefore, whenever I tended to be too Toscan in my accent, syntax, and I would use too many dramatic expressions from my area, he would perceive it much more than I would. And he would try to add something which was from Rome, perhaps. Okay, so we were trying to find a balance, because the language in that book is very demonic every day. And it's brilliant. It can convey sad things, brilliant things, funny things with the same voice. It's something perhaps we don't have that much in Italy. And therefore we had to rely on the very democratic texture of the very popular language we do have, but our writers are not using it much any longer. So I really had to consult, to ask friends from different areas, do you have any idiomatic expression which conveys this meaning? No, but I have another, and so I really needed a lot of exchange.
So it was a research.
And it was, indeed.
The democratic Italian. It's true that in Italy we have this problem, because every region has their dialect, but you can't use dialect in translating books in Ireland. And you can't use standard language, because Irish writers, generally speaking, don't write in standard language. If you take Donald Ryan or Roddy Doyle, which have experience, or Irving Welsh or others. So you have to keep a substandard language level without ever descending into dialect.
Yeah.
Because the dialect puts immediately that person, that story, in Naples in my case, in Tuscany in your case, or whichever, that is absolutely a no-no. So you have to constantly keep this below the level of language. At least Donald Ryan book is small. But the difficulty, because the characters are kind of, I could think of a painting, a few traits, a few language traits make a character.
Yeah.
It's all in the words, and they're not common words, they're not...
Not at all, no. Perhaps I should have mentioned that Donald Ryan is from Tipperary. He was born and bred in Nina, and he currently lives in Limerick. And his books, all of his books, not just The Spinning Heart, are written with this very strong accent, Tipperary English. I was lucky enough to have the chance to ask him sometimes, what did you mean here? I really can't find anywhere. I mean, I have dictionaries, online dictionaries, idiomatic, list of idiomatic expressions. Sometimes I really couldn't find it. He said, oh, sorry, yeah, indeed, that is an expression we only use in Vienna. But by the way, have you ever heard to stick a hand on someone? To refer to a kiss? To stick a hand on someone?
The Irish audience has never heard this. Anyone from Nina?
Is this really an expression from Tipperary? Have you ever heard this?
What's it, Andrea? Say it again.
To stick a hand on someone. Really?
Stick a hand on someone?
Yeah.
Well,
Which
because
means
you
to kiss.
approach them with your head and kiss.
Yeah, of course.
I heard
Yeah.
sticking a loaf on someone.
Which means?
The Glasgow kiss.
Oh, the Glasgow kiss, yes.
Maybe it is.
No, that was actually an attempt of a different kind.
Yeah, I mean, looking into dictionaries was very optimistic, I think. I find the dictionaries are written on the basis of our work.
Yeah, but by now on the internet you find loads of people who are, you know, like they do like using those idiomatic expressions they find most interesting from their areas, and they publish them. You have loads of like Urban Dictionary is one of these. The Urban Dictionary.
Yeah, but they're not always accurate because
Of course, they're
a
not.
lot of
No,
people
it's
just make a
you
guess.
make-
You know?
And
Yeah.
they're also, they age
So-
very quickly.
Yeah.
You know, I translated Train Spotting, I got from the publisher loads of things on the language of drugs. They were here today and gone next month probably. It's all
Yeah.
underworld slang, so you couldn't go too heavy on that slang either, because a lot of it was regional, a lot of it was specific to a certain thing. I couldn't use words I wasn't comfortable with. I knew nothing about drug trading, obviously, in Italy or in any other country. And again, you had to very, very carefully thread, replicate what was in the original without going beyond the border. So.
But an important point was probably the sound of it. I used to live
Absolutely.
in Nina, in County Tipperary for a while back in the 90s, and that helped me a lot. I could really, again, like feeling of way perhaps. I was reading, and then I finally got into the
Hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that helped me a lot. So the syntax is definitely much more important than the single word, the single grammatic expression. At the end of the day, the reader himself, the reader herself, appreciates the syntax, how the text sounds in her mind.
And it's always fascinating me, does humour translate? I mean, the opening line of The Spinning Heart is just so brilliant, where he's walking towards the cottage and hoping that his dad will have died the night before, and then he says that every day he disappoints me. So, I mean, how do you translate something like that and keep the humour?
Let me see if I have
The answer to this, Catherine, is it depends.
Yeah.
Never give a straight answer, because it all depends how you can put it down.
But
on
is it a
paper and
particularly difficult thing to translate, is it, to capture?
the humor, I would say it is, yeah.
But not necessarily. If you enter in the spirit, when I work, I think of someone who would use funny expressions, someone who makes me laugh, and try and think, how would he or she say that?
Okay.
And you go, you know, things are said. There are things that are probably not the same, but humor situations are the same, basically everywhere. So if you can go around the houses and recreate the same feeling, the same quick response, repertory, it works. It takes, you can't use the same words. You can't use, or maybe you can, but that would be an exception. But otherwise, it all depends.
There was a director, a certain Fellini, who said that certain things only happen in Riminese.
Yes.
So he wouldn't agree
But then
with
you
that.
would.
Rimini would be a place that perhaps you all know, yeah, Rimini, in Italy. Yeah, I don't know, dialects, local languages, local voices. I think that the Roman dialect has some kind of really essential difference, something very peculiar, typical. The same applies to Tuscany and Tipperary English for sure, yeah.
Catherine, could you actually say from reading Donald Hines from Tipperary? Is there I certainly couldn't place him anywhere except
Well, I suppose I knew he was from Tipperary when I
Right.
read the book, so that kind of colours
Yes,
that,
it takes away the suspense.
I knew it was certainly, I mean, if I hadn't known it was Tipperary, I certainly would have known it was that neck of the woods.
That next woods,
Yeah.
I get the same feeling,
Yeah.
but I don't know if it's linguistic or what.
Yeah, there's an accent which comes through really clearly in the way his characters speak. So yeah, I would have identified it as that bit of the work, but I certainly wouldn't have known this is particularly Nina.
Yeah.
I would have thought, Tipperary or that bit of the country. It was a huge county anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
Let's bring you back in, Catherine, and tell us a bit about your relationship with your translators. Because you must have, you now have a cohort of people in several languages and several countries that come back to you, ask you questions, ask for your cooperation.
Again, it depends.
It depends.
Some translators it appears like to work, completely on their own. Some don't ask any questions at all, which is fine. I assume that I do my business, they do theirs. But I think with Ada Arduini, who has done the last 3 or 4 books, I've met her on several occasions, and one of the really interesting things which came up, which I certainly wouldn't have known, obviously, was the use of collective nouns in Italian. So I had, for example, a murder of crows, an exaltation of larks, you know,
Right.
particularly with birds, where we have beautiful
They
words in
English.
English.
They
No,
exist,
they're real.
they're
They are
canon.
absolutely real.
Right.
And I had all of these birds because the young boy in the last book was fascinated by bird watching. And anyway, she got in touch with me on this particular point and said, we don't have those. But that fascinated me. So she had to find an alternative. So we worked together to find an alternative. And she made various suggestions, excuse me, for each one. I can't remember now what they were, but I know that she got the spirit, because it sounded, I think the sound of, you know, an exaltation of larks and the spirit of it is something beautiful. And that's what she captured in her alternative. So it didn't matter to me that it didn't say an exaltation of larks, that it said something else, but with that
Because
spirit.
you couldn't.
Because you couldn't.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't matter.
You do have lark, but we don't have.
But you don't have exaltation, do you?
Yeah.
You do something about that.
Make one up.
We accept suggestions from the audience.
But I like that to and fro, you know. Skype is great because you can actually have a face-to-face with somebody. And you know, you can see by their facial expression, or she can see by mine, whether I'm thinking, oh, I'm not sure about that, or, you know, so you can have a really good
And
back
you do
and forth.
speak Italian, or
No, I understand
grasp
Italian.
yes.
My second language is Spanish.
Right.
So, and from the back and forth to Italy over the last 20 years or so, I can understand a conversation. I did do some classes, but I held back on trying to answer questions in Italian because two bits of my brain would have to work at the same time. I'm trying to answer the question about the creative process, and I'm trying to answer it in a language I'm not familiar with. So I stick to understanding what goes on. And
Which
then
is
usually
50% at least.
yeah, or at least, yeah. And I think at this stage, I mean, I know that there are lots of false cognates between Spanish and Italian. There are always pitfalls like that. But, you know, context is huge. So when you hear a discussion about a book, and you know that that's what's being discussed, and the context of it makes so many things clear. So probably at most occasions I reach maybe 75 to 80% of understanding. But that's my passive language, you know, I wouldn't, it's stressful enough actually trying to answer questions about the work that you've done, to, you know, to try and give a comprehensive
Because
reply.
you've worked in English, so
Exactly.
that book exists in English,
In English,
for you,
in
so
my
that's a huge difference. I
Yeah.
think.
So we stick to English for the interviews. But it's always interesting to see how different translators approach different things. There was one, I think it was you and I in touch actually, about an old-fashioned bike in Dublin used to be called an upstairs model. And I remember you and I getting in touch
Seriously.
about that, and you said, am I right in thinking an upstairs model is an old-fashioned bike? So again,
Right.
context for
Yes,
you
context
was
is
enough,
essential,
you know,
yes,
and
yes,
that's what
yes.
it was.
I must say, I usually think what I'm translating is what's between the covers.
Yeah.
And it's my business.
Sure,
You know,
absolutely.
I have to do my best
Yeah.
to sort it out. But there are situations where you need to
Yeah.
consult a higher authority. None better than the other.
And I would have that view as well. I wouldn't interfere. I wouldn't, you know, say to somebody,
No,
"Are you sure
I
you've
don't
got that?"
think
You know.
authors are that interested until the final product is.
Yeah, sometimes publishers don't want you to write the author.
Yeah, by publishers, we leave them out of this discussion. Otherwise,
A lot of themselves.
Yes, a lot of themselves. And the way you might think writers are badly treated, you have no idea. Not being consulted on the
Oh, I know,
title,
I-
on the cover, on the...
I think at this stage I have a reasonable
You
idea.
have a good idea. Not to mention when the publisher's editor get their hands on the copy, and he comes back on Thursday and say, can you send it back on Monday? And it's in PDF, and you have to mark all the corrections on a different sheet of paper and avoid the curses for the poor unfortunate who did the job and doesn't understand English, hasn't read the book, has no ear for what you try to write. Anyway, let's leave publishers aside.
It's another whole
It's a
discussion, isn't it?
Yes, more for the Translators Association, especially initially than here. There are authors, for example, Gunter Grass used to do it and others, when a book was ready to be published, they would gather their translators and present their book. Is it something that ever happened to you? Or
No,
have you ever
absolutely
thought?
not.
Because he would explain, so to speak, or introduce them to the book. It was a kind of brainstorming. I've never taken part in anything like that.
No.
Would you think it's interesting? Does it hasn't happened?
In my case, I should do a seance.
Yes.
And walk with
But there are others. Some are still doing it.
No, but we do meet. I mean, as regards Joyce translators, we do meet. There's a great guy in Zurich called Fritz Fenn who organizes meetings. And so the first meeting was first translation meeting was called Transwork years ago. The title was a bit. So it was like myself and other translators from different languages working on the same text.
Yes.
So beforehand they circulated a number of instances that we're going to, the problematic passages that we're going to discuss. And this was very helpful because you see that sometimes culture changes the meanings. Like what you were saying before, that when you don't have some structures, you have to invent them, or you have to create substitutes. Sometimes something is not acceptable in a different culture, or sometimes a joke doesn't work in a different culture, especially when you're talking about very, very novel stuff. This is why I always advocate, and I tell publishers all the time, that they should give books to translators who are into that kind of culture, like people that know Irish culture should translate Irish books, people that have British culture. Like I'm always giving alcoholics, Brendan B and Joyce, because they know that I like the book. But you should really know what you're talking about, otherwise things get, like at the moment I'm finding finding it very difficult to translate this guy from Kentucky, because his English is a very local English. There are no dictionaries whatsoever. There are a lot of things that he has written purposefully to mislead the general reader. So he invents words, Like the other day there was this word flishing, and there's no way to find flishing anywhere. So at the end I called the man, and unfortunately I didn't have the Skype contact, so I called him, in America, and I was like, €20 for a call. And at the end he told me that flishing is the way he and his family call fly fishing, fishing with the fly. I said, fly fishing. He said, it's local, local idiom.
Yeah.
So when you're not into that, I mean this is an extreme example, but if you're not into a culture, it becomes very, very difficult to get the most of it, because one will never get.
We have a class here.
Oh, really anti-date? He's kind of saying your future authors.
So this is the problem, I think, and maybe like writers can do something about that. They should ask publishers to assign books to people that are, I wouldn't say expert in that culture, but at least acquainted with. Like for instance, nobody that has never been to Dublin could ever translate Joyce. It is impossible. In fact, the other guy, when I did Ulysses, there was another guy, a very famous translator, Giuliana Zeuli, a very famous writer, that did the same thing, Ulysses. And I have a lot of respect for him. What happened was, my book came out, and his book was postponed for next year because the publisher decided that it was not going to happen that the same people could buy two Ulysses the same year. So what happened was that during the summer, he went out with bits and pieces of his own translation in a newspaper, and they were full of mistakes to the extent that Stony Butter had become a character. So since I have a lot of respect for the man, I wrote to the publishing house and listed all those mistakes. He said, before you come out with this book, you don't want to destroy the reputation of a great writer, you should have somebody help him. So they decided to have some person that used my translation, right, for a different publisher, and corrected his own translation with my translation, because this was out of generosity, because me, myself and other people decided this could not happen, that a writer comes out like that, Like Stony Butter had become a guy walking in a street, on another street. So yeah, this is the problem. It's the main problem for translators. When they are, but this...
That brings to mind two problems. One is the issue of copyright. Is that translation yours?
Oh yeah.
Okay, you can give permission to others to copy it. And more profound, there was an initiative initially, maybe 25, 30 years ago, when they try to publicize books translated by writers. And this is the case in Poland. Jan Michelati is a very famous author. And to me, I don't know what you think or others who have come across this thing, what you read was not a translation. You did not read the original author. You read the vanity of the author, of the writer who translated. I don't know if...
It happens all the time. I mean, there are also...
So it is an experiment. Yeah.
It's a marketing.
It's a marketing thing, because they all thought a great writer will be a great translator and will write a great translation. No, not at all.
We're not being evicted, no?
Not yet.
We have to translate into another room.
Not yet. Physically. Not yet. We'll see. Any questions from the floor before we move on?
What you said initially about women writers, identity, etc. Could I ask you, and for two Italian translators, do you think a man could have translated your book? And I would ask the two Italians, do you think you could translate Catherine's book because you are men?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think that, you know,
You
it
probably
probably...
said about voice, etc.
Yeah, but probably the same thing happens, you know, to a writer if you want to write from the point of view of a male character, which I have done. And I think all writing to me is an act of imaginative empathy. So the character, it was actually the book that
Yes.
Giuliana translated.
Yes.
So for me, that whole exercise was to actually learn how somebody might react to something which was going to be fundamentally different to from how I might react to something. So it was the process of getting myself into somebody else's head, and getting into the male character's head brought the voice with it. And, you know, I felt that voice was authentic. So my answer, and leave the translators aside for a moment, but as a writer, which translators are, a writer can write in either a female or a male voice once they get that authenticity. And to get there becomes that leap of the imagination where you inhabit somebody else's skin and you walk around in that body for the amount of time it takes to write the novel. So if it's possible for me to have that kind of act of ventriloquism into a male character, I certainly wouldn't object to a male translator translating my books, as long as I felt that the voice was authentic. That to me is the only benchmark, not the gender, one way or the other. Now, I don't know how the translators feel, but that would be my view on it.
And are all your translators women?
Yes.
So far,
So far, yeah, as far as I know.
So,